Welcome to the Wagner's first digital version of Weeknights at the Wagner. This talk is Food Waste from Compost to Chicken Coop with Dr. Maureen Breen. I'm Susan Glassman, Director of the Wagner Free Institute of Science, and I'm delighted that you could all join us for this program. Tonight, we're launching a weekly evening talk series, each with a different speaker. And for those of you who know the Wagner, we've moved our popular Weeknights at the Wagner lectures to a remote format, so we can reach you while you're home and while we're home and our speakers are home, but hopefully bringing you the same programs that you love at the Wagner and maintaining it as close as we can to the experience of being at the Wagner, albeit not in our lecture hall, but as a live talk and with Q&A with the speaker afterwards. We're closed to the public, and we will be, at least till Philadelphia goes green, but we'll be running these weekly. We'll continue them through at least the end of July, possibly longer, depending on schedules. And I just want a coming attraction next Wednesday. We've scheduled a talk with Amy Corman from Penn State Extension on ending the anguish of the spotted lanternfly infestation, something I know lots of people are interested in. And then we're excited also on July 1st, we've got our speaker schedule. That's Inga Saffron, the architectural critic for the Philadelphia Inquirer, and also a Pulitzer Prize winning author. She'll be talking about historic preservation and architecture in the city. So we hope you'll come back and join us for those. Tonight, we're really happy to launch this series with Maureen Breen, who is president and founder of Philadelphia Backyard Chickens. Maureen is an associate clinical professor at Drexel University's LeBeau College of Business. But in addition to teaching people how to turn food waste into fresh eggs with chickens, she is the leader of the movement here in Philly to legalize backyard chickens, which we all think is very important. Her recent research includes the value of chickens in diverting food waste from our municipal waste stream. And she also, fascinatingly enough, is working with regional breweries to recycle spent beer grain as chicken feed, which keeps it out of landfill. She has 5 chickens at home. She'll talk about them. 4 black stars, 1 Easter egger. And I think we're gonna get to meet one of them tonight, which I see in the background.
Thank you, Susan. I can first of all tell you chickens do not eat spotted lanternflies. We wish they did, but they don't. But they do a lot of other good things, and we'll talk about food waste, some of the other options, including chicken. So I'm going to start sharing my PowerPoint now. Okay, so now you should see my PowerPoint, food recycling, on the screen. So food recycling, it's a thing. When I was a kid, we called it eating leftovers, but now we call it food recycling. So anytime that we take food which was destined for the trash can or a use besides feeding humans, and we turn it into human food, that's recycling. Definitions vary a little bit. We'll talk about some of the different things that can be done with food instead of wasting it. But basically, we're talking about let's not throw this stuff out instead. I'll give some background on food waste, how much is happening, and then talk about some of the various options that people are exploring to reduce food waste. And then I'm going to talk about what me, some of the things that we can do to reduce food waste. Some of you may have been at Dr. Cannon's talk on recycling realities, where he talked about different recycling options, and it was kind of doom and gloom. Sometimes what we think is recycling isn't really. We're making an awful lot of stuff, and then what do we do with it? Food recycling has some doom and gloom in it as well, but it has some positive notes to it also. Trying to advance my slides, and they're not advancing. Okay, so food was never meant to be wasted. Food, I think, is actually something beautiful. I think it's a very pretty thing to look at, and it was never meant to be wasted. Food, by definition, is something created for feeding people. So it's definitely not something that we're supposed to waste, and yet we're wasting a lot of it, actually. The general problem of food waste. Approximately 33% of the food that is produced for human consumption never gets to feed a person. So it's wasted. The concepts of waste can vary. There's an idea that there's some sort of natural waste that has to occur. You see banana peels there in this pile of food, and we have uses for them, but we humans can't digest banana peels at this time. So no matter what the definition is, though, the problem is we are wasting too much food. And it's not just the food that's being wasted, it's the other resources that go along with all this food, what it takes to make the food. The land that is used, the water that is used, the fertilizers, pesticides, all the chemicals that are used to make the food, the transportation that's involved in food. All those resources are going in to try to put food on people's plates. And when we waste the food, we waste all those resources as well. Wasted food generates greenhouse gases. If we don't eat it and we put it back to rot, if it decomposes aerobically, it produces carbon dioxide. If it decomposes anaerobically, it produces methane. So aerobic decomposition would be in a compost pile or an open area. Anaerobic decomposition is what happens to most of the stuff that goes in landfills because it's buried so deeply there's no oxygen there. So you got carbon dioxide or methane. Carbon dioxide is in the atmosphere a really long time, about 400 years. Methane's usually up there only about 12 years, but methane's more impactful in terms of greenhouse gases and global warmings. So there's just nothing good about food decaying. Where's all this food waste happening? It's really happening everywhere, farm to fork, seed to supper, field to family. Along the entire production of food, we're wasting it. And the waste is happening for different reasons at different points along the production cycle. And those different reasons and the nature of those different pieces in the supply chain lend themselves towards different possible solutions about what we can do with all this food. But the food production cycle is from the agriculture of growing it to harvesting it, processing it, wholesale and retail sales. Now we've bought it home, household purchasing, household preparation, household serving. So I want to talk through this cycle of food from farm to fork, why the food waste is happening, how much food waste is happening at these places, and then what you can do about it. So let's start with the agriculture of growing food. Farmers overgrow in anticipation of some crop losses, some crop failures. They plant too much food. They don't harvest all that they plant. They don't harvest anything that looks ugly. They don't harvest off season. If they've planted corn and it's time to harvest the corn, they're going to do that in a large mechanical way. And underdeveloped ears will simply be thrown away. Whatever corn isn't developed gets thrown away. Now, actually, most of our corn matures uniformly. It's been bred to do that, but it doesn't matter. It would get thrown away. They're creating a product to sell to manufacturers to a large extent. And manufacturers have specifications on the inputs to their products, what they want it to look like. Even if it's not going into manufacturing, wholesalers and retailers have specifications on what they want the food to look like. They can only sell food of certain sizes, and they're just not going to take it if it doesn't meet those specifications. So to hedge against the pests and the weather, they're going to plant more than they need. They may not harvest all that they plant. There is work afoot in trying to get people to eat ugly food, but there's a kind of a retail problem with the idea of ugly food. If I walk into a grocery store and there's an apple for $1 a pound and there's an ugly apple for 80 cents a pound, might I instead buy that lower priced apple? The ugly one took just as much work to make as the pretty one. The profit margin is probably not as good on the ugly food as it is on the beautiful food. So you've got retailers kind of competing against their own profit margin if they're offering the higher end pretty food and the lower priced ugly food, which would have the same nutritive content. So there's some resistance in the business of food retail to the idea of selling ugly food. Recently with COVID-19, you may have heard some stories. There were problems in the meatpacking industry where the supply chain couldn't process all the animals that were ready to be harvested. And I think it's very sad. Some animals were simply slaughtered and let to rot. And, you know, I don't know, their life was in vain, wasn't it? If ultimately they weren't able to provide food to people. And not only that, but they had been fed, they had been watered, they had been medicated and cared for, and then they were not able to be used to feed people. So that can happen for a lot of different reasons, and we recently saw that happening. When immigration is difficult at times, sometimes there's difficulty getting fruits and vegetables harvested in this country because there may not be the workers in the fields to do it. And in that case, the food simply rots. Harvesting, look at that, rows of neat corn. Harvesting is a mechanical process. It's automated. Any food that doesn't fit into the automated harvest is simply not going to be harvested. Food can be damaged in the harvest process, and that's simply thrown away. Sometimes the food is actually left in the field. If there's not a market, then they won't even pay the money to have it harvested because that would just be losing money if there's not going to be a market to sell it once the food has been harvested. Processing. Processing, you can see this is an automated thing. It requires machines. So food that does not fit to the machines is going to be discarded. This is food. We could eat this, but it doesn't fit into a machine process. The largest loss in the food processing industry in Germany, which is an industrialized nation just much like the United States, is at the food processing level. That's where they have their largest loss. So I'll give some data on where we have losses around the world, but this is definitely a place where food loss happens. This is not inedible food. It just doesn't fit into a machine. Wholesale and retail sales is another place. It's just pretty much bad news all along the food chain here, isn't it? But we're going to end on a good note from this conversation. Wholesale and retail sales. It's another place where food loss occurs. People like to shop from beautiful, fully stocked bins. If there are 2 apples left in the bin, we think something is wrong with them, and we're not going to purchase them. So some of the food that is sitting in the bins is just there to make the bins full and to make them look good. Now, again, it's possible for stores to donate some of this food. There's a ShopRite in West Philadelphia that's owned by Jeff Brown that recently, a couple years ago, was working with Drexel University to take some of the food, that might be getting a little bad, like there's a spot on the eggplant, but most of the eggplant's good, or the bag of carrots, one went bad, but the others are good, and turn that into usable product. I actually had the opportunity to attend a cocktail hour at Drexel University, and they served as the appetizers things that had been made from this repurposed food, and it was quite good. But there's problems with scale, there's problems with consistency. It may not always be the same foods that are available, so how do you design recipes and products around such an uncertain supply chain of what food might be available there? So one of the things we can do is be willing to buy the last apple in the bin. And as I talked about before, the ugly food competes with the pretty food and has less of a profit margin. So we consumers might be okay with the idea of the ugly food, but it could hurt the profit margins of the retailers. Purchasing, we simply buy too much food. I think we all know this and we can admit to this. Bulk buying, sale prices, diet intentions, those spring greens, I buy those things all the time, and I think they start going bad in my car coming home. And when I'm there, they look so healthy, and I think I'm going to eat salads all week. And sometimes I've simply bought too much. Packaging is large. These clubs that we have, Costco and BJ's and Sam's Club, they encourage us to stock up on a lot of food, and sometimes it really is more than we can eat, particularly we're kind of moving towards smaller households than people used to have, but we still go to these giant shopping places, and we simply buy too much food. Once we've overbought this food and we get home, what do we do about it? Well, in household preparation, we're tending towards more individualized meals. We have moved away from a family meal where everyone sits down and it's pot roasted potatoes and green beans. We've become more accommodating to different people's tastes. Some of the prepped foods that we're able to acquire enable a family to sit down and everybody has kind of what they like. So somebody might heat a lean cuisine in the microwave because they're on a diet. Someone else may open a can of soup because that's what they want. Somebody else might like White Castle burgers and they cook them. That tends to lead to a little bit more food waste because everyone has a little bit of waste and nobody wants what the other person has, and there's not as much of a sharing food. So we can think about the way we prepare foods in our home and whether or not that's leading to any waste. Household servings. We put too much food on our plate, plain and simple, because there's so much there. This is a family who is eating there. They're sharing the, looks like the same meal, so they're not wasting as much, but we just put too much food on our plate. About 3.3% of what goes onto a plate ends up in the is thrown away, is discarded in some way. Amazingly, that number goes up to 39.1% for cafeterias and restaurants. Particularly school cafeterias where the children are somewhat mandated to be given an amount of food, or nursing homes where by law people have to receive on their plate so many calories and they're simply not eating it. So we're just putting too much food on our plates and then we're throwing it away. Now that looks like it's a little compost pail that food is going into, which is better than throwing it away. But it might have been nice if the person hadn't put that on their plate, if they hadn't purchased that food, if the farmer hadn't grown that extra food, because those peas going into the compost pail consumed water, they consumed fertilizer, it took fuel to transport them, and now all of that is being discarded. It's not going to its best and highest purpose of feeding people. That's what your 3.3% from your plate looks like. So it's not a pretty picture. So from overgrowing, from not fitting into machines for processing, from buying too much, from serving too much, from throwing it away, this is what it all adds up to. And that's pretty ugly. At this point, I'd like to bring some good news and let's talk about some of the things that are being done to help with food waste, and then go into even some of the things that really you can do, how effective they are, and what's going on with food recovery. First of all, we talk about food recovery. The Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, has developed a hierarchy on what recovery is. Now, the idea of recovery started in about 1975 in Europe when they came up with the idea, if we're not going to throw stuff out, what can we do? And it started out with kind of a two-level hierarchy. And the first thing was, don't produce things you're not going to use. And the second thing was to reuse them. Now, the Environmental Protection Agency, this food recovery hierarchy has been around for a long time and is quite popular, has come up with better ideas. So we start at the top. The best thing is source reduction and reuse, which is just reduce the volume of surplus food that is generated. Stop making all this extra food. The next thing to do is to feed hungry people, to donate extra food to food banks, soup kitchens, and shelters. The next thing is to feed animals. If you can't feed people, then at least feed animals. The next thing is industrial uses, provide oils for refining and fuel conversion. If you can't do that, then compost it. And if you can't do anything, then you are going to have to landfill it or incinerate it. And landfilling and incinerating are two different things. Food does not incinerate well. It's very wet, actually. But if you can't do something, then that's where it's going to have to go. So the first thing we want to do is reduce, feed people, feed animals, maybe use it in industry. If we can't compost it, and then if we can't do anything else with it, it's going to go in the landfill or it's going to be incinerated. So where does food waste happen? I told you it's farm to fork, it's seed to supper. This gives you a sense of where that food waste is happening from foodprint.org. A lot of it is happening in growing food. From the agriculture of growing food and fishing, we're wasting 98 billion pounds there. Now, some of that may or may not be avoidable. If you think about pulling a fish out of the ocean, once you've pulled out, say, an 8-pound fish, we tend not to eat the head, the tail, we tend not to eat some of the organs, so that gets called food waste. Some of it truly can't be eaten by humans. Some of it we may want to rethink, and perhaps it can be eaten by humans. 2 billion is lost in processing. blame wholesale and retail sales. Together, they're wasting 63 billion pounds of food. But look at us in the household. We're a pretty big contributor to food waste here. We're wasting 76 billion pounds of food with our purchasing too much, with our preparation methods, and with how much we're serving to ourselves and we're taking in restaurants and cafeterias. So really, after the harvesting of the food, we're the second biggest cause of food waste in the United States. And as I've said before, food was never meant to be wasted. Food is something that's beautiful. So let's take a look, now that we understand where food is being wasted along the production cycle, how much is being wasted at different sites in the production cycle, what we can do to reduce food waste. A popular way to keep food out of the landfill is garbage disposals. And there's been controversy around whether this is or is not a good idea. I am aware that the speaker on recycling from the previous talk does not think that it's bad to put it into the garbage disposal. He thinks that's okay, but that has problems as well. Food is not meant to go down the garbage disposal, so that's certainly not a good idea. In Philadelphia, we have what's called combined sewer systems in 75% of our city. And that means at heavy rains, which do happen, this garbage is simply dumped into the river. So there's really no sending this stuff away. Under these combined sewer systems, it's possible when there are heavy rains, and it does happen, that this garbage is simply being put right into the river. Now, they clean the water before you drink it, so you're not drinking it, but it can cause some other problems. As the food goes into the water, it provides nutrients for algae. So we can have these algae blooms that happen, then that decays, it deprives the water of oxygen, and then the fish can die. It's gross. Food is not meant to be thrown into the river. So it does something other than putting it into a landfill and causing some decays there. But why are we growing this beautiful food and then just dumping it in the river, which, if we put too much in the river, can lead to this eutrophication problem and damage the wildlife? Food is not meant to be put in the river. Food can be donated, which is, of course, a wonderful thing to do. This is the logo from Phil Abundance, which is a really good food provider here in the Philadelphia area. There is legal protection for under the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Food Donation Act, that if the food donated in good faith to a food bank, which they redistribute in good faith, hurts someone, they have some protection. But food banks still care deeply about the people that they're serving, and they're not going to take garbage. Nobody can do anything with blueberries that have gone bad or been bruised. So the food banks want to give good food to people. They want to give fresh food, healthy food. They want to give people the food that they want culturally. So they can't take food waste. They can really only take good food. Hopefully we can get it to them before it turns into something that would have to be wasted. And believe it or not, it's actually illegal to donate a lot of different foods. In New York City, for example, a bakery cannot donate like day-old bagels because they were previously served and they do not contain nutritional information. Now, previously served could mean they sat in a bakery case and nobody bought them. But in New York City, they cannot be donated to a food bank. Michael Bloomberg started that in 2012. Some people thought this was done as a punishment to homeless people who were lining up to get the food. There is sometimes kind of a societal perspective on people who need food donated to them. So sometimes people look down, if you would, possibly on food donation. I think a lot of us learned a lesson during COVID-19 and are learning, about people who can sometimes need food. But there's, a social impact around food. But it's actually illegal. Okay, sometimes you can't donate the food. Half of a milk carton with milk, you can't donate. So there are limits on the ability of households to donate food. A lot of people, and I'm sure you're thinking this if you've ever donated food, we actually go out and we buy food if it's time to donate. When Fill Abundance comes around at the holidays, or they say they need food, we pick up a couple extra cans when we're in the grocery store. So it's difficult for this to be a good way for us to reduce food waste. We can burn it. We can incinerate the food. But food is not meant to be burned either. It's the wettest part of municipal solid waste. It doesn't convert to energy very efficiently. It's about 60% water, and the water doesn't burn. Our own zero waste director, Nick Esposito, here in Philadelphia, I was talking with him a while ago about some ideas with food waste and the chickens, and he said the city would love it if he could get the food waste out of what we ultimately have to burn in this city, because it's just so wet, it's extremely inefficient to burn it. So this kind of goes back for those who were in Dr. Cannon's class when he was talking about the idea of burning plastics. It's really kind of a last thing that we want to do with food. So why would you grow food, water food, use insecticides, herbicides, and transport it, and then just burn it? That doesn't make any sense. We can ban the disposal of food, make it illegal to ban food. Massachusetts has regulations that ban the disposal of food and organic waste from businesses, and this cuts down on doing it. So what's going to happen when we tell people that they can't dispose of food anymore? Some states, California, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Vermont, also have food waste or food disposal bans. They're generally more on restaurants than on individual households, just because it's kind of easier to do the regulation at that level. They do seem to be working to reduce the food waste going into landfills. Sometimes all you get to do is pick your best option, and it can give you a new set of problems. So if people can't throw out their food, what are they going to do with it? Well, they're going to still keep throwing it out. Another option is pay as you throw, where you charge people to throw food out. There are some places that charge people just for throwing out their trash. There are actually suburbs around Philadelphia where they don't have a municipal trash service, and people pay to have their trash picked up. And if you can charge people differently for different size containers of trash, it incentivizes people to think about whether or not they want to throw something out. Because if they're going to have to pay to throw it out, then it has a different value to them than if they aren't going to throw it out. So you can charge people based on weight. I know some of the suburbs, you rent a certain size container and a certain number of pickups. So it's kind of a gross way of getting you to pay as you throw. If it's going to cost money to throw stuff out, sometimes it incentivizes people to get rid of their waste in other ways. It costs $3 in the state of Pennsylvania to get rid of a tire. So what do people do? They dump them in parks because they don't want to pay the $3. And we have a problem around the city with tires. These tires sit around, pools of water develop in them, mosquitoes breed in them, and it's just pretty ugly. People will dump household trash in municipal waste cans because they'd rather do that than have to pay for it directly. So again, sometimes all we get to do is pick what our problems are. Some solutions come with their own challenges sometimes. Some of the things we can do: garbage disposals, but then we're putting our waste into the water. Donate it, but you can't really donate food that's less than desirable, and some donations are illegal. Incinerate it. It's very wet. It's actually not a good thing to burn. You can ban the disposal of food. That tends not to work at the household level. You can do pay as you throw, and then people may look for other ways to get rid of it rather than pay the costs of throwing it away. So, what else can we do with food waste? We know how much food waste is going on. It's happening from farm to fork. Quite a bit of it is happening at the household level. We have some solutions that bring their own challenges. I think we should still focus on it. But what can you do about food waste? You can eat it. Stop throwing it out. There's a fellow in the UK, Tristan Stewart, who's the author of a book called Waste: Uncovering the Global Food Scandal. And he advocates what he calls freeganism, which you might think of as dumpster diving, for discarded food. He has a program called Feeding the 5,000, where he goes around and he comes into a town and he goes around the town and he finds food that people are going to throw out. This is packaged food you see in this dumpster too. He cooks it up and he serves it. And these are well-attended events. So if you're not up for a freeganism dumpster diving, just start in your own kitchen. Don't put wrapped food into your trash can because it's edible. So really, really think before you throw this away. I know some folks may have been watching Tiger King, and in Tiger King, they get meat donated to them, packaged meat. Somebody picks up a package of hamburger while they're shopping. They get up to the cash register. They say, oh, I really don't want this hamburger anymore. The store is not supposed to put it back into the refrigerated area because they don't know how long it's been in the shopping cart. So this meat was being donated to the Tiger King to be fed to the tigers, but he wasn't that good at feeding his workers. And sometimes they would go through it first and take out some of this food and eat it. Stores don't like the idea of people dumpster diving in the back. Sometimes they can actually have legal liability for injuries. Some stores will take this food and damage it. They'll spray paint it with blue on it. They'll do things to actually damage what is perfectly fine food just so that people will not go dumpster diving for it. This does not seem like a good way for us to, why are we making all this food and then having people just destroy it? All right, so if you're not into dumpster diving, what are some of the other things that you can do with this food? You can eat more of the food than you think you can. You can make vegetable broth from kitchen scraps. Just take all that stuff, the tops of celery in there, the skins of onions, the stubs of mushrooms that you're not going to eat, and boil it. That can turn into a vegetable broth. You can chop things up. Broccoli stems can actually be eaten if they're cooked properly. Okay, you want to cut them small. You want to into bite-sized pieces. You want to saute them to get them really soft, but you can do it. There's a salad called panzanella. It's old bread salad, actually. You can use potato peels. They're edible. I personally have been putting them in my mashed potatoes for years. I never peeled my potatoes. They're really good. Beet greens are edible. Carrot tops are edible. You can take carrot tops and boil them. They make a really nice sweet tea. But you can eat beet greens, okay? It's similar to chard. You can saute beet greens. There's a lot of things that you can eat there. Carrotop pesto, those are greens on the top of carrots. You can make them into a pesto. So if you've got something in your hands and you're using some of it for cooking, Google whether you can use the rest of it for cooking or not. Because a lot of what we've grown in these foods, we can actually eat if we only knew how to prepare them. And if we started to respect food for the process that it takes to make it and understood that, we might be a little bit more inclined to try to use all of that food. Kale is a great example. 20 years ago, kale was nothing more than salad bar decoration. People didn't really think you could eat it. It was just for decorating the salad bar, and make sure you don't get any of it in your food when you take from the salad bar. And please don't take extra food from the salad bar, right? We're putting too much food on our plates. But that was lowly kale. Around 2013, people started to eat this stuff. Someone tasted it. They declared it to be a superfood. And now we're bonkers for kale. We're putting it in everything that we make. So much so that now for salad bars, they have to make fake plastic kale because we love the real stuff so much that they can't get it for salad bars. And we're having all kinds of kale shortages. The 2015 blizzard, they couldn't get enough kale into New York City. People were running out of kale, the thing that we all went out to buy. So we've really turned the story on this thing that we grew where we used to call it salad bar decoration. And now someone said, what does it taste like? Is there a way to cook it? And now we're actually eating it. We're eating so much of it that now they have to make fake kale for the salad bars, which maybe is good because maybe that's a way to use up some of that plastic that we're making. But let's redefine what we really think we can eat when we're talking about something not being edible. Just don't throw it out. Do something else with it, but don't throw it out. Think of the energy that went into that. Think of the fuel, think of the herbicides and pesticides, and try to come up with something else to do besides throwing that out. Another thing you can do is you can change your diet. The EPA has these models called waste reduction models that talk about the savings that could happen if we do something or don't do something. So one of the things you can do is you can change your diet, perhaps to use things that are less impactful on the environment, that are less prone to being wasted. So if you're interested in trying to have a diet that's more environmentally friendly, here's a hint of what's to come. You can change your diet. Come on, if he can do it, you guys can do it. Now you know what I'm going to be talking about, right? A plant-based diet. This is talking about, this shows you all the different options we have for the material. If we don't produce the material, recycle it, landfill it, combust it, compost it, or anaerobically digest it. Now the interesting thing is you look down this column, if we landfill it, the environmental impact is the same regardless of the food. For combusting, composting, and anaerobically digesting, it's pretty much, it's the same for no matter what the food is. But if you look down the first column of source reduction, if we change from a beef-based diet, which has a negative impact of 30.05, to a plant-based diet, fruits and vegetables, of 0.44, the MTCOE is metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents. So it's the greenhouse gas effect of this diet change measured in equal units to carbon dioxide. So we can have a positive impact on the environment if we switch from a beef-based diet to a fruit-based diet, and then don't waste it. So the foods that we choose to eat in the first place have an impact on how we're impacting the environment. And if we're going to make that beef, look at the environmental impact of making that beef. That was pretty significant. Don't waste beef. The fellow in the UK who does the dumpster diving, Tristan Stewart, has actually found packages of completely fine pieces of meat in the dumpsters. There's a fellow at the University of Arizona who goes into landfills and digs down and like studies sociology and people through what happens in landfills. And that meat, he found just perfectly fine packages of meat, you know, that are 10 years old sitting down there. I wouldn't want to eat them, but look at the environmental impact that went into just making that. Had we not, if we weren't going to eat it, why did we even make it in the first place? All right, so you really like meat and you don't want to give it up. And instead of eating beef, what if you switched to eating chicken? Well, we can go back to this worm data and we can see the huge difference between beef and poultry. If we don't produce the beef, then we avoid the 30.05 metric tons of CO2 equivalent, and the poultry produces 2.47. So if you just switch from a beef diet to a poultry diet, and then we don't produce that beef, we don't waste that beef, you're already helping the environment that way by saving some metric tons of CO2 equivalents. I happen to really like chickens. I happen to think that they're better things they can do besides being a substitute for beef. And one of the things that they can do is the research that Susan talked about earlier is chickens can eat food scraps. That is some research that I've recently completed and I'm still working in that area. Chickens are omnivorous. They can pretty much eat all the same things that we eat. They don't eat avocados, they don't eat raw beans, they don't eat potato peels, but they eat pretty much all the same stuff that you eat. They shouldn't eat the treats, but neither should we. This was a presentation I did out at a composting site where I took foods from breakfast, lunch, and dinner, that's the 3 plates, and I put together a menu of what chickens can eat. What's in that plate for breakfast is eggshells. They will actually eat their eggshells again if you crush them up. That gives them a source of calcium, and that's a bit of bacon grease there. They would eat the bacon grease. Now, is bacon grease a waste product or not? Some people like to cook in it again and use it, so it's not a waste product. It took as much energy and resources to produce the pound of bacon grease as to produce the pound of bacon in the pig. So if we're taking that bacon grease and using it and not throwing it out in some way, we're still continuing to use those resources that went into making that food. Their lunch is shrimp shells, and then the tops of tomatoes that I always cut off because you don't want that hard little piece at the top, and then some broccoli stems and some lettuce cores down there. Their dinner is some meat on a bone. And when it gets down to that gristly part or the fat that we don't like, chickens love that stuff. So there's a lot that chickens can do to sort of clean up after us, if you would. In my research, I found out that a backyard chicken and the people who participated was eating about 1.5 pounds of household food scraps a week. So keeping that out of the landfill. If you've got a flock of 4, they're going to eat about 300 pounds a year. And that's about how much each person wastes. Not all at our household level, but through the entire process. So it pretty much takes about 4 chickens to clean up after one person in the United States right now with the food that we're wasting. The greenhouse gas emissions from a backyard flock of 4 chickens is about half what it would be from the anaerobic decomposition of that food if it went into the landfill. So I would say if you must generate food waste, I would highly suggest that you get some chickens, 3 or 4 per person. And not only do they keep our food out of the landfill, but they turn it into fresh eggs. So they take garbage and they make a really delicious breakfast out of it. Those backyard eggs are the best. In conclusion, food was never meant to be wasted. We are wasting about 1/3 of the food we produce, along with all the resources that go into producing that food. Food waste occurs at every stage of production, from seed to supper, with quite a bit of it happening in the household. 1/3 of it happening in the house, of the food waste that occurs is happening at the household level. And you can take steps to reduce the food waste or to recycle it. You can eat it. You can, if you must, compost it. You can buy less. And then if you really like it, you can get some chickens and they will help you not to waste your food. They will turn your garbage into a delicious breakfast. At this point, that concludes my presentation, and Corinne is going to help me work through any questions that folks had.
Hi everyone, if you have any questions, just put them in the chat and I'll pass them along. For now, the first question we have is wood ash okay to put in the compost pile?
You can put wood products in your compost pile. There's kind of a combination of brown and green that you go for. So anything organic can go into the compost pile, from the earth to the earth. Chickens actually like to bathe in wood ash too. They like to roll around in it in the dirt.
And someone says they didn't see fish in the waste chart. How does seafood compare?
I guess I didn't have that in the data. I'm not exactly sure how seafood compares, quite honestly. That wasn't in the EPA's data. Dairy food, grains. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. I don't know. Sorry.
And are you going to introduce your chicken friend behind you?
Sure. Would you guys like me to bring the chicken out? You want to see a chicken go crazy in my house? I'll do that for you. She's pretty mellow right now. It's bedtime for her. Come on, girl. They want to meet you. You're fine. Let's see if we got her on. The important thing in holding a chicken is to hold their wings down. So this is my chicken who's not really happy about being here. I don't name them. I sort of nickname them as time goes on. And she's an old chicken right now, so I call her Old Brownie. She's the Easter egger. When she did lay eggs, they had a blue-green shell on them. And she's a tough old bird. About 2 months ago, she was attacked by a fox in my backyard. And I came out and she was in the fox's mouth and I scared the fox off and she survived. So she wants to go crazy and flap her wings. She's a little unhappy being away from her friends, but there you go. There's Old Brownie. And she does eat food scraps. Good girl, in you go.
Relatedly, someone asks how much space and resources you need for chickens. And also, if you could just describe the Philadelphia Backyard Chicken Project a little bit.
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm hoping that this is all because you want to reduce food waste, and that's why there are questions about the chickens. A chicken takes about a square yard of space, and the Philadelphia Backyard Chickens is a Facebook page largely, and we are just about 2,200 people in the city of Philadelphia and nearby who are raising chickens. Oh, you know, I didn't talk much about what we're doing with the beer distributors that was mentioned in the introduction. At the beginning of 2020, I worked with the Environmental Protection Agency, and we've actually published this work in BioCycle, if anyone reads that. And we connected with some beer distributors, or some Bennett Composting here in Philadelphia, which collects organic material from around the city and turns it into compost. There is a lot of spent beer grain in the city of Philadelphia. When people are making beer, they're using this kind of wheat stuff a lot of times, and then they just throw it away. And the wheat product remains edible. It's human edible. So Bennett Compost has some beer distributors or brewers that they are collecting this stuff from. And before COVID-19 hit, the first Saturday of the month, we went down to Bennett Compost and we simply gave it away for free to anybody who came. And I think we've repurposed about 6 tons of beer grain and kept it out of the landfill by feeding it to chickens. If you're interested, there's actually a product. I don't get any money for hawking this stuff. There's a company in California called Regrained, and they are taking beer grain, that spent beer grain, and they're turning it into human food. So they have these little crackers here, Urban Garden. They make granola bars with this beer grain stuff, and we're trying to give chickens to eat that as well. Additionally, on Facebook, we've connected with home brewer clubs, and sometimes people will say, hey, I'm in Fishtown, I've got 13 pounds of spent beer grain, give me some eggs, I'll give you some beer grain, and we're trying micro-locally to get that grain into chickens instead of having it go into landfills. If anybody's into, can I plug my chicken keeping class? If anybody's really interested because you want to reduce food waste by having chickens, the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society is running a chicken keeping class next Tuesday. So if you go on Pennsylvania Horticultural Society sites and you look for backyard chicken keeping basics, they're doing a chicken keeping class, and it'll be me again. It'll be my chicken again. But I'm really going to talk really about chickens at that point.
Great, thank you. And someone asks, are there ordinances to be aware of with respect to keeping chickens in the city? And I'm sure that's something we can talk for a long time about. But.
It is illegal to have chickens in the city of Philadelphia. I estimate there are about 10,000 chickens in the city of Philadelphia. Council people have been to my home and seen my chickens. You are allowed to have chickens at a place used for research or teaching. And I do conduct research. I've published my research, and it's on chickens in the household environment. So I believe that I and my test participants are okay under the law, but it is for most folks illegal, and we're working very hard to change that law in Philadelphia. We're one of the few major cities that does not allow people to keep just hens. We're asking them, can we have half a dozen hens in our backyards to eat our food scraps?
Thanks. And this may be better suited for your course on chicken keeping, but how does one start and maintain a food coop with maybe like 5 chickens in it?
You come to a class. You read up on it. You get some baby chicks or some mid-sized teenager ones. They're called palates. And it's like caring for any other animal. You have to learn what it eats. You can buy the feed at Weaver's Way in Mount Airy. You can buy it at Primex in Glenside. Chewy.com delivers it. I've heard that Walmart up near Franklin Mills in the Northeast sells chicken feed. So it is available. And it's really just like caring for any other animal. You have to feed it, give it shelter, and then keep it clean. And they can eat your food scraps. They eat meats. They eat chicken.
Omnivores. And
yes.
Can you raise chickens with cats around in the neighborhood?
Yes, you're going to need to keep your chickens safe from all sorts of predators. So having cats in the neighborhood is not really a problem any more than any other animal. Cats really aren't so much of a problem at all.
And I think this is the last chicken question at the moment. Oh wait, no, there's more coming in. But someone notes that Attic Brewery gives away spent grains, which I figure is useful to have in the recording for future listeners. And someone asks, can you compost chicken poop and other waste from the chickens?
Absolutely. Chicken poop is actually a really good compost. There is a little factory here in the DeConey section of Philadelphia that goes over to New Jersey and collects the chicken droppings and comes back here and manufactures a garden fertilizer for it. It's high in the element nitrogen, which is a difficult thing to get in fertilizer. The chicken manure is actually so high in nitrogen, it's what we call hot. And if you put it directly on your plants when it's fresh, it's going to burn them. So you've got to put it in the compost and just let it cool down a while. And it'll still retain a lot of the nitrogen that's good for your plants. And the other stuff that comes out of your coop would be the bedding materials that you use. And as long as they're organic, like straw or some of the other materials, it all just goes right into the compost bin. I actually have a neighbor who kind of comes around when I'm cleaning out the chicken coop and asks me if he can have the stuff. And I put it in a wheelbarrow and I give it to him. When I've come home from my dog walks, he's never asked me for that stuff, but he wants the chicken stuff.
I wish I'd known that when I was living next door to chickens.
Mm-hmm. Good stuff.
And someone asks, I live in Colorado and have 3 chickens, but 2 are ganging up on the littler one. Is there any way to give them more enrichment? They have a 6 by 6 foot run and whatever we don't eat already, but they still chase the one chicken.
Yeah, chickens are nasty animals. They have a pecking order and there's simply somebody in charge and somebody who's at the bottom of the pecking order. And you have to let that go a little bit. If it becomes really detrimental to the chicken that's at the bottom of the pecking order, you want to try some separation. You're going to have it a little bit difficult if you've got 2 big ones and 1 little one. The little one's never going to have a buddy. So either maybe get some little buddies about that same size if you can do that. Or do some separation, separate the meanest chicken possibly from the other 2, give them a timeout, and then the other 2 will kind of work out a new pecking order a little bit, and when you reintroduce the bully, say a week later, they may have to work their way back in and they may not have the same strength. Alternatively, you can separate the little one sometimes just to get away from the stress of being bullied, and I guess its self-esteem grows or something. But when you reintroduce the little one, it may also defend itself a little bit more. If they're really different in age and you've got only one that's a little guy though, it's just going to take some time for them to grow up and be able to defend themselves. But don't let them get hurt. Don't let it get too bad.
More complicated, like social phenomena between chickens than I would expect.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about composting newspaper and cardboard?
Sure. I mean, you can compost newspaper and cardboard. You want to cut them up small so they have some time to break down. I'm not sure of the greenhouse gas emissions associated with doing that. Maybe Dr. Canning could chime in because he did do paper recycling, and I'm really more familiar with food waste and food recycling than other materials. So we could, if Dr. Cannon has something to say, we could unmute him.
I'm hitting the space bar here. So
Okay.
The one thing, especially though with newspapers and printed materials that sometimes you have to be cognizant of is oftentimes, especially associated with the inks, there are toxic substances that you have to concern yourself with. I typically would not recommend composting newspapers. Cardboard is usually okay, but newspapers and a variety of, especially color printed material, may not be very garden friendly. So it may be, but I wouldn't take the chance on newspapers.
Thank you. And after using vegetable scraps to make stock, do you then compost the vegetable scraps?
I absolutely do. So, but at least I've pulled more nutritive and food value out of the product before I've moved it lower on the EPA's hierarchy. And I actually first give it to the chickens. I have a hierarchy in my house. So I would first make that available to the chickens, let them pick at anything that they wanted to pick at, and then anything that was still left in the container after they had picked at it would then go into the compost bin.
Very thoroughly filtered.
Mm-hmm.
And someone notes that many community gardens, even if they don't have available beds that you can use for gardening, will still accept your compost. So if people want to compost and want a place for it, you should check with your local community garden and see if they're willing to work with you.
That's good. One of the difficulties of composting is not everybody has the capacity to do that. You know, if you're in an apartment or a small backyard, you may not have the capacity to do that. Bennett Composting does pick up that they turn into compost, but you're right, community gardens as well may accept it. That's a good idea. But we've still moved pretty far down the food hierarchy. You know, if we're doing composting, it's better than incinerating in landfill, but we want to try to move up the hierarchy.
And what benefits would you expect as the move towards urban agriculture gains momentum?
We've been moving towards that urban agriculture for a while. I think people will appreciate what it takes to grow food, and I think they'll become less likely to waste it, quite honestly. If you've worked hard to grow it, I had neighbors that just grew some peas and they got about 20 peas out of their first batch and they ate them because they were their peas. So there was no waste in that. So I think as people get closer to food and they understand it and they work harder for it instead of going to BJ's and buying giant old bags of stuff, I hope that it leads to less food waste.
How would you recommend starting a compost pile in a small city backyard?
Well, there's lots of things you can do. You can take an old trash can, drill some holes at the bottom of it, and just start to put your organic matter in there. We always say from the earth to the earth. So anything that was vegetable, and you want to have it aerating. It has to turn around a little bit, so you can just do that. You want to take some dirt from the ground because it's microbially active and throw that into your composting a little bit just to kind of get things started. There are nice kind of tubs you can buy that rotate if you wanted to do that with your composting. I have a pretty good size Philadelphia backyard, and I just have these kind of metal cages that I just put my compost in. I've got 3 piles, and my chickens actually in the spring and the winter or in the fall, they go out there and they turn the compost for me. They dig around in it and they look for bugs and they grind it down. So they actually help with my compost production. But you can just take an old plastic trash can and put some holes at the bottom because some liquid will drain out. As I've said, this stuff is usually wet, and just let it sit and kind of cook that way. It does need heat. It won't work in the wintertime, but it will work in the summertime. And then your neighbors aren't seeing it. Sometimes neighbors don't like to see a compost pile. They don't understand it.
Yeah, I should note, I have a both big for Philadelphia, small for everywhere else yard, and I have one of those pre-made plastic tumblers, and it only really has issues when it's gotten out of balance in what I put in it, but it doesn't, animals haven't really gotten into it and it doesn't smell bad, so it's a good option, or something makeshift similar.
Yeah, some people think it smells good. I mean, like a Rubbermaid container kind of thing. Just you have to have a way for the liquids to come out. And I have not really had problems with animals. It's vegetable and fruit matter. You're not going to put in things that are meat-based. So that's usually what our urban predators are looking for, is something meat-based, not vegetable and fruit.
Makes sense. Are there any legislation or organizations promoting decreasing food waste that you recommend?
That I'm not really familiar here in Philadelphia. We do now have a composting site coming up in Philadelphia where they're going to collect from school institutions. Foodprint.org is a good organization that's doing it. I'm not aware of any really activist groups here in Philadelphia that are specifically focusing on food waste. I don't know where it stands right now, but given our budget constraints, they were going to eliminate the position of our zero waste director, Nick Esposito. I'm not sure where that's at with all that's going on in the budget, but it was a low priority item to reduce food waste. So I'm not aware of any organizations in Philadelphia that are really focusing on that.
And what won't chickens eat that is a human food waste product?
Potato skins, avocados. I don't feed them anything that's chocolate, so a chocolate donut goes stale. I'm trying to think what else they won't. They don't eat bad food. You know, it's not like having a worm compost bin, vermicomposting, or having a compost bin. It can't be moldy food. Sometimes those bags of spring greens some of them get icky on me, and if I give them all to the chickens, they do not eat the really wet, horrible ones. They'll only eat the better ones. So they'll pretty much eat most of what we would eat. So they're pretty good for cleaning up after us. They shouldn't eat too much bread. They shouldn't eat too much of that green stuff. I've also done some work with a guy called the Chicken Whisperer, who is the USDA's backyard chicken guy, and he likes the idea of the food waste reduction. But when I published an article for him, he's like, well, you got to tell people it's not nutritionally complete for them. But however, people are a little more willing to kind of throw random food scraps to their chicken than they are to their dog, because with dogs, they're concerned about the weight and the health. They see their dog differently than they do a chicken. And chickens seem pretty able to absorb most of what we put out there for them. They don't like everything, though. They'll let you know. Mine don't like peaches, but some people's chickens seem to like peaches.
And you mentioned some farmers don't harvest when it costs more to harvest than it's worth to sell. Are there any financial incentives to get those crops to people who could use it?
There are people they're called gleaners, you know, who will go out to ask the farmer, can we go out to your field and can we pick through what's there? And depending on, you know, whether it's a corporation and you have to go through corporate legal to get the permission to do that, or it's a small farmer, that can be done. Phil Abundance tries to accept that stuff, like we'll go out and get that if we can have it. But I'm not aware of any government subsidizing of that to get that food to people. It's pretty grassroots how it happens, and pretty local. And you know, we don't have, we're not really near a lot of farmers. It happens in kind of big farm plots in areas. So you've got to kind of get your gleaners to that plot and then, you know, get the food moved. But I'm not aware of any government subsidizing to bring usable food out of the field and feed it to people.
And someone asks, if you want further education in this area, where do you look? And I'm not sure if that's on general food waste management or chicken raising.
Well, if it's food waste management, I would look into the EPA's Food Recovery Hierarchy Program, because they are working with organizations, partner organizations all over the country who sign on with a commitment to reduce food waste, and all sorts of different things are going on there. So I would look into the EPA's food waste recovery program. Also foodprint.org shares a lot of information about what's going on with food. If it's chickens, there's Philadelphia Backyard Chickens, and the Chicken Whisperer is very data-based in the information that he provides. And there's a person called the Chicken Chick who is also very good in the information that she provides.
I'm trying to make sure if I've covered everyone's questions. And any, last one is, any novel methods for food preservation to reduce food wastage?
So for food preservation, if you learn to can food, if you learn to pickle food, you can pickle watermelon rinds. I don't know if people realize that, so that would be a food waste to take that. Pickling it acidifies the food, so sometimes it can soften it. So you can pickle broccoli stems, you can pickle the bottom of asparagus. So those are some ways to, kind of preserve the food if you want to do that, if you have the storage capacity for that, and you are someone who's comfortable with doing canning processing, then pickling can help. It changes the composition of the food because it's acidic, and that can help make some foods edible.
Thanks.
So-
And well, there's one more which I guess we'll quickly get to, and then any other questions, if people want to email them to me, I can pass them along. If you're burning food waste or chicken questions, or you can, if they're about chickens, you can take the class too. And this is, what do you think of Best Buy and sell by dates?
Oh yeah, Best Buy and sell by dates. Sometimes they count and sometimes they don't. So you do want to, that's a good point to bring that up. In the household, it really depends on the food. I look up all the time whether the date really means something. Best Buy and sell by doesn't mean that the food has gone bad. Used before means that the food has gone bad. So you do want to, that's a very good point actually we should have talked about. Sometimes it means something and sometimes it doesn't mean anything. And perhaps the quality of the food does change over time. It may degrade, but it's still edible. So find a way to salvage it. Put a little seasoning in it, throw it into a recipe, throw it in a smoothie, and try to eat it. But do know first what foods it matters and what foods it doesn't matter. I mean, soy sauce goes bad actually. Peanut butter goes bad, but some milk you can see has gone bad. But some foods, the crackers get a little soggy. Use them as a breadcrumb in a product instead. So.
Thank you.
Okay.
And thanks for all the great questions, everyone.
Yeah, I think we're wrapping up.
The goal was reduce your food waste. Chickens was a great way to do it, but reduce your food waste.
Thank you so much, Maureen. We're so glad to have you kick off our Weeknights at the Wagner Weekly series. And I think we're really glad that we know that you'll be back with us when Kevin's teaching, I'm sure, in the fall and any other time. Such a great topic, and it keeps changing. There's so much information, so it's great. And I think I might I don't think I'll do it this week, but I think I'm going to sign up for the Backyard Chickens class.